Hello, global gardeners. It's Monday, such a wonderful day of the week because I get to spend it all with you. Today's going to be an interactive show. I really do want your participation. The question of the day is, what do you do with your harvest? Are you growing things specifically to get to the harvest point, and then at that point, do something special with that fruit or root or leaf or whatever it is you're growing? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. There are many things I grow in my garden with a specific purpose. Let's go ahead and start with zucchinis, for example. So many of us are growing the zucchini and it can become overwhelming. So, what do you do with it? How many different ways do you eat your zucchinis or any type of squash that you're growing in the garden? Now, I love my zucchini over the grill on the barbecue. That little bit of heat and the grill marks, I'll slice it into relatively thick slices, put them on the grill with a little olive oil and salt, and that's it. It's fantastic. I love eating it that way. I also just will saute cubes of my zucchini. I will do spears of zucchini cut like a pickle, and then I'll ferment them. I actually have a video about fermenting zucchini that way. Those are my top three methods, but I've gotten more than one comment for people saying I should try zucchini fritters. Now, I did do a squash fritter a few years ago, liked it. I just tend to go towards simplicity, which is why I'll just slice and throw on the grill. But a fritter with an egg, some flour, some salt and pepper, and then fried in oil, delicious and a great way to use zucchini. So, is there something different that you do? Or among those methods, what's your favorite way to do zucchini? Dan says, I've pickled zucchini and make zucchini bread. I kind of forgot all about that one. I have a video on zucchini bread because zucchini bread is just about my favorite vegetable bread. Absolutely. One of the things I did last year, because I like zucchini bread so much over the course of the year, is I took the zucchini, the shredded zucchini. My recipe calls for 2 cups of shredded zucchini, and I took the zucchini from the harvest last year, shredded it, measured out 2 cup portions, and then freeze dried those portions, put them into sealed mylar bags, and then over the course of the winter, just rehydrated that zucchini to make zucchini bread, fresh zucchini bread in the middle of winter. So absolutely great way to do the zucchini if you have it. Gina says, I add zucchini to a lot of canned goods, tomato sauce, salsas, relishes, giardiniera. Yeah, mixing it with other vegetables, great idea. If you're not a fan of anything in particular, like squashes and zucchinis, and I have to admit, I'm kind of picky when it comes to eating one of those type of vegetables or fruits all by themselves. Mix it with something else. And mixing it may make it a little more palatable, may make it a little bit easier to eat. Llama Llama says, I saute zucchini, tomatoes, onions with some garlic and top with eggs every morning during the season. Fantastic. And so that's the idea for the show today, is getting these different eyes. I've never different ideas. I've never sauteed zucchini for breakfast like that, but it's a great idea. We all, as gardeners, are growing our gardens to get to a point that is going to make us happy. Now, if it's a flower garden, we want to get to that point that maybe we can pick the flowers and display them in our house. If it's a vegetable garden, it's getting to that point that it's a harvest and we can use them in some way. And I think too often, and especially for new gardeners, but even more experienced gardeners, we are growing with the intent of learning how to grow or learning how to grow better. And often we grow plants that we really didn't have a reason to grow. We didn't have a purpose for that plant when we put it in the ground. And then we reach the harvest point and it's a now what kind of moment. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because too many times in the past, I've put good plants, good crops, good harvests into the compost pile because I really didn't know what I was going to do with it all. And suddenly I was inundated with excess of zucchini or any other type of vegetable. You've heard me talk before about preservation methods and preserving our foods. Freezing is among the easiest ways. That's the way most of us are preserving our harvest. But not everything freezes well, and there might be better methods for some of the things that we grow. So let's talk about some of those different ideas. And so the courgette, uh, another name for what we're talking about from the UK, makes absolutely lovely cake, and courgette and sweet corn fritters are good too. I love that idea. And again, it's not just the fritter, but maybe mixing it. If you're a fan of corn fritters, then take some courgettes or zucchini and mix it all up with the corn. Typically, when we make a fritter like that, we're going to shred it, but there's nothing saying it has to be shredded. It can just be diced or maybe small cubes. Also, great ideas. Jen is saying, I love to make zucchini boats with the summer ones that get big. Add in roasted vegetables from the garden, sometimes a little cheese and or breadcrumbs. Ooh, I haven't done that. So the idea being that you take a big zucchini and you scoop out all the seeds. That's the worst part about the squashes, is the bigger they get, the bigger their seeds are. Scoop out all those seeds to make a boat, to make a big bowl, and then fill it with other vegetables and roast it. Fantastic. Put some breadcrumbs and cheese on top. That sounds like a meal all in itself. Lauren says, I use a spiralizer to make zucchini noodles. I've done that before too. I've done zucchini noodles like spaghetti, and I'm guessing you do something similar. So make, instead of having pasta with a sauce on it, do the zucchini noodles with a sauce on it. A butter garlic sauce on the noodles like that. Oh, it's fantastic. And even spaghetti sauce. Wonderful. Wonderful. Absolutely great ideas. Petrus says, my wife uses zucchini in bread. Great way to do it. Jeanette says, I like to save some by dehydrating for soup. Another great idea. I actually have a link. I moved the links that are normally lower up closer to the description today for the dehydrator and for the freeze dryer, because I agree. When we talk about how we're going to use our harvests, we often focus on the fresh harvest. We harvest it today, we want to use it today, maybe tomorrow. But doing those things like freezing or dehydrating allows you to save it for later. And the dehydrating and freeze drying with these vegetables, fantastic way to add them to soups and stews later in the year. Still get those vitamins, still get those flavors, still get some extra thickness in whatever you're making. Wonderful idea. Good idea from the outlier gardener. The flowers can be eaten as well. Tempura fried with ricotta cheese filling. Oh, fantastic. And so I'm noticing right now in particular on my zucchini, on my other squashes, on my pumpkins, I'm still getting flowers. But it's too late in the season for some of those plants to really produce a lot of the fruit. You can cut those flowers off and stuff them. You can stuff them with cheese. You can stuff them with a meat filling. You can do all kinds of different options. Typically, the method that is used is like a tempura. You're going to coat it with a light flour or maybe with some breadcrumbs and then fry it. wonderful way to use the flowers. And so I really like that idea because it gets us thinking about the different parts of the plant that we might be using. And so I hope you're taking notes, and I'm hoping throughout the show today you'll be taking notes, because that's the idea: is what are you going to do? And maybe it's something you've never thought about, but somebody else is doing. And then you look it up, you find a recipe for zucchini flowers, and there's a bunch of videos on zucchini flowers and how you can use them for food. And then you go for it and try something unique. Milltown Life has a recipe for cucumber kimchi, and you substituted zucchini for the cucumber. Very interesting. I've never done anything like that. Ruth Ann does zucchini banana bread. I love banana bread. That used to be my favorite. Then I started doing zucchini bread. That became my favorite. Those are still my top two. And then, yes, when you mix zucchini and banana together, it's out of this world. It's the best of both worlds. So absolutely, absolutely love that idea. Thank you for that. So let's move on. You can see that there's so many ideas: shredded zucchini in cupcake pans, and then bagged up for using later as like little pucks. Great idea. Marlene dehydrated shredded zucchini this year and makes zucchini brownies. So the reason I started with zucchini is because I knew there were going to be a ton of different ways to use the zucchinis. And so I'm so glad you all have helped me out. And Heidi does an apple crisp with zucchini. I've never done that. I believe I could not tell it was made with squash. That's the nice thing about a lot of squashes and zucchinis, courgettes, is that by themselves, they have a flavor, and you may or may not like that flavor. But when mixed with something else, that flavor really tends to take a back seat to the other things you're using. And so, like with apples, you're going to taste the apples in an apple crisp, and you're not going to taste the zucchini at all. So, wonderful, wonderful way. Eva Nicholsard says, when my squash gets too big, I cut them in half, hollow, and fill with sausage and cheese or marinara sauce and bake. Great for leftovers. Fantastic. So if you have something else, go ahead and throw it out there. I can see that there's a lot coming. Dusty Flats, add zucchini to spaghetti. Always a good idea. And so yeah, let's talk about beans now, because beans are a very common crop that are being grown. And how do you use your beans? Now, steaming is a great way to really retain the flavor of most of what we would harvest in the garden. Frying is easy, but frying will modify the flavor, especially if you use a breading on whatever it is you're going to fry. I like the sautéed beans. That's typically a method I use. Some olive oil and some salt and the beans. Great way to do it. I also like to do pickled green beans, not fermented. I have fermented, but doing a pickle with a vinegar so that it is just like a dill pickle that you would get in a jar, but instead it's green beans. My family loves my pickled green beans. I'll put in some garlic cloves. I'll put in 1 or 2 cayenne peppers to give it a little bit of a zing. And believe me, I've made a lot of friends with my pickled green beans. In previous years, 20 years ago or so, when I was really into making my pickled green beans, I wasn't a big fan of the green bean by itself, but pickled, it was something that I would eat. Over time, as I discovered different types of beans, like the rattlesnake bean, for instance, and the dragon green bean, it's a better flavor to me. So I don't grow green beans anymore because I'm growing these other types of beans that I like better. But the methods for eating them are all essentially the same. we saute, we steam, we fry, we pickle. Tell me, how else are you using the green beans? Because those are some limited methods. Something like the zucchini we can mix in with other things and it can take a back seat. But with the beans, they they hold their shape and they hold their texture. And so how are you using your beans to get the best out of them? Jay Dixon says you can roast green and yellow beans, also make a casserole to use up. Okay, there you go. Here in the US at Christmas and Thanksgiving, we typically have green bean casserole. My daughter loves green bean casserole. And so each of the holidays, we're fixing green bean casseroles. I'm not a huge fan of the green beans casserole, but it can be as simple as mixing with some cream of mushroom soup, some breadcrumbs, and you throw it in the oven. The recipe isn't much more complicated than that. I have tried green bean casseroles with cream and with fresh mushrooms and tried to make it much more fancy. And my kids didn't like that. They just liked the basic recipes that come on the back of a Campbell's soup can. So, yeah, casserole is a great way to use green beans. I appreciate that. What else are you doing with your beans? Rick says in Australia, baked beans are popular, especially on toast. Interesting idea. I haven't had baked beans on toast, but I like the idea. It's one of those options that we have out there, and with our global audience, I'm very interested to see what others are doing in different countries when we talk about some of these common vegetables. And thank you for that link, Jay. There's my link, or her link to my video on how to make old-fashioned pickles. Always a great way to use your produce. Dana says beans are a perfect reason to purchase a vacuum sealer. I think it makes the best frozen green bean texture of all the preserving methods, except dilly beans. Love those. Yeah, dilly beans are the pickled ones. And so let's talk a little bit about when we choose to freeze something in the future, like green beans. Uh, the best method, if you didn't know this, is to go ahead and put them in boiling water for about a minute, take them out, put them into cold water, and then put them into the bag. If you put the fresh green beans into a bag and then take them out later, it'll still work, but there are enzymes that are at work there. And so you really need to spend that first minute in the boiling water, and they will last much longer and taste much better over time if you do that beforehand. And so people that do a lot of freezing know that they should blanch those vegetables first to really get the best preservation after that. And oh, yep, there's Mobius 981 and blanch/freeze unless your freezer is full like mine. So that's a big reason why I do so many different preservation methods, because when you have a big garden and you have a big harvest and you want to save all of your crops for later, your freezer can get full very quickly. And so that's where the dehydrating and the freeze drying really is a show changer. It's allowing you to now take that same harvest, and instead of putting everything in the freezer, you put some of it in your pantry, where hopefully you have an extra shelf or two for all those things that are now dry and can be stored on the shelf. So definite game changer when you do different methods of preservation, especially if you're doing a lot of saving of your food and your crops and what you're planning to do later. Dusty Flat says the famous green bean casserole with mushrooms and fried onions. Can't beat that. Lauren says I put the dragon bean in my salad. I also found a book titled Bean to Bean, which has about 175 recipes for various beans. Awesome. Yes. Salad, pickled. I like the pickled beans and both green beans and individual different types of beans in a salad. Great way to do it. But also raw. If you have some of those, like the dragon bean, I love the dragon bean, and the flavor is just so good when it's fresh that you just cut it into little bite-sized pieces and mix it into your salad. Fantastic way to eat your beans. Riverdale Gardens says sauteed with thin sliced potatoes, garlic, salt, pepper, and green bean casserole is a staple at Thanksgiving. Llama Llama says blister the green beans in a hot cast iron pan. Yum, yum. Next year, I plan to try a bunch of pickling recipes. Yeah, go for the pickling stuff. That makes a lot of difference. Yeah, getting that blister. I show that in my video on the shishito peppers, where you put them in a hot pan and you blister them. Works the same with beans. If you get that that dark brown, and I don't like to go full black, but a really light black blister on the outer uh, side or outer shell of a bean, it really does change the flavor. That heat makes a big difference. So try a hot pan and blistering your beans. Could be something you like. California Writerific says puree beans, or CA Writerific. I hope I didn't assume it was California. Puree beans with garlic and olive oil, then mixed with shredded potato, egg, and onion, form into patties, freeze, and then saute in a little olive oil. Ooh, that sounds really good. You get the beans and the potato and the egg holding everything together. The garlic and the onion are adding that extra flavor. Wonderful idea. Thank you. That's something that I haven't seen before. Carla says steam, sprinkle, salt, and eat. Add bacon. I tend to like the bacon when I do my beans as well, so that does add that extra flavor. I usually have bacon fat in my refrigerator to throw in and get that flavor if I choose to. I don't do so much anymore. I'm eating much healthier these days without all those added fats, but those added fats do add a lot of flavor. John says we usually end up with pounds of green beans in the freezer for use later. They seem to hold taste and texture well. Yeah. Yeah. Beans, there are some things that freeze very, very well. Beans are one of them. The other is carrots. So let's talk about carrots next. Freezing carrots is a great way to preserve them. I will freeze my carrots in slices. So I'll cut them into slices so that I can just pull some out of the bag and make individual servings as needed for the carrots. I like to saute my carrots, starting with a little bit of olive oil and salt to get them cooking. Close to the finish, putting maple syrup with my carrots. So they'll be cooked carrots with maple syrup. I love that. One of my favorite ways of eating carrots. Of course, I like eating carrots raw. Yesterday and the day before at lunch, I had carrots with hummus and used the carrots instead of a chip or a scoop of any type, like you might be using, like corn chip or a cracker. I used a carrot scoop hummus, healthy, tastes great. So how are you doing, or what are you doing with your carrots? And we'll go ahead and continue with the others. Ruth Ann is talking about green beans and new potatoes. Yep, beans and potatoes together, especially the new small potatoes. Absolutely great way to do it. Seems I see that around a lot, particularly with our English gardeners. Mixing, I think too often, and I'm not sure how big a problem this is in the UK and Australia and Canada, but at least in the US, we tend to eat our vegetables by themselves. At least the people I know eat their vegetables by themselves. Green beans are green beans, carrots are carrots, potatoes are potatoes. And we don't mix them as much as we probably could and should. If we go to a restaurant, the chef might be mixing the vegetables around, but we really don't do it much at home. So, yeah, shake it up a little bit and try adding lots of different things that we could put together, and ratatouille is like that. A lot of things mixed together, as Mobius 981 says. Yeah, ratatouille is a great option when you're growing a lot of different plants. And there are some classic ratatouille recipes, but ratatouille is one of those things that you can make it however you want and mix it up with whatever you want. And it's that same basic idea. There are some of those things that many of us don't fix at home. We might eat at a restaurant, but it's so easy to do uh, with what we have growing in our garden, like the gardeniera pickling, where we will throw the green beans in with the carrots, in with the garlic, in with the onion, in with the zucchini, and you pickle all of it together in the same jar. A great way to mix things. And when the flavors start to meld together, absolutely fantastic way to get some of the flavors that we really, really like. TJ's asking about blanching jalapenos before freezing. When it comes to the peppers, I don't blanch peppers, and I'm trying to remember back to my training about preservation, but the skin is different, and it's not typically the blanching of the peppers. Peppers just go straight in, and when I save my peppers, I just put them straight into the freezer. That's not saying you can't blanch, but I don't think the blanching is necessary with peppers. Big Will Dog's asking or saying, I chop and wash, then freeze in a bowl, then put in a pound amounts in food saver bag. I don't blanch because they go too fast or they go too fast to go bad. So that raises a good point when we're all of this stuff that we're talking about when we're going to freeze something is freeze it when it's fresh. I often wait too long because so much of what we harvest will go bad, and bad's a relative term, but within a day the texture will change, and in 2 days the taste will change. And so when you're planning to preserve something, harvest, bring into the kitchen, and then preserve it in the freezer or however else you're going to do it. Ruth Ann says, I don't blanch peppers, just chop and freeze. That's the method that I do. And the another way for doing peppers, I also will do this, is roast the peppers. So roast the peppers first, and then I'll freeze the roasted peppers. And then later in the year, when I want to make a recipe, maybe I'm making tacos, maybe I'm doing some other type of Mexican dish, usually I'll take out some of the roasted peppers. They have different flavors still, and you add that as a chopped or sliced frozen ingredient to your into your recipes. Definitely works. And Mobius says peppers brilliantly do not require blanching. Okay, good. I think we're in agreement there. Always a fantastic way to get the information out there when we can share what we know. The Sabi Gal says, I like to can my own pork and baked beans. Also, chopped potatoes or little potatoes work great for camping trips. Fantastic idea. Denise says, we saute our green beans in butter, toss in some sliced almonds, and season with soy sauce. Great way. If you if you go to Chinese restaurants, at least around here, that's a standard dish, is the green beans with almonds and soy sauce. Get inspiration from the restaurants. If the chef is doing something and you like it, why can't you do it at home? I think that's one of those things that we can stretch our methods and try to learn different ways of doing things by just trying something new. Maybe it was suggested by someone else. Maybe we saw a picture. Maybe we just want to copy what the chef did, but it really can improve not only your diet, because a lot of this stuff is healthy or healthier for you, but it gets away from the mundane. How many of you are essentially eating the same meals 7 days a week? Taco Tuesday, I love Taco Tuesday. I'll say 3 out of 4 weeks in the month, I eat tacos on Tuesday because I like tacos that much. That may be mundane to others. It's preferred for me. But then there are other things. I like spaghetti. And so typically on Friday or Saturday, I'll have spaghetti on a pretty regular basis. I love salmon. Typically, I'll do that midweek. So Wednesday, maybe, and Thursday, I'll do salmon on a very regular basis. And so I love my diet. I like my food, but it does tend to be pretty much the same stuff on a pretty regular basis. So throwing in those vegetables and fruits that we're harvesting to make it a little bit different, I still will do my salmon, grilled salmon, baked salmon, poached salmon, but I'll modify the side dishes. So one week I might have the grilled zucchini that goes with it. The next week I might have the carrots with the maple syrup. And that's how you can incorporate some of these things into your diet. Even if you do have the same stuff on a regular basis, you don't need to change the star of the show if that's what you really like. It's the supporting cast. It's all those side dishes that can really make the whole meal much better. And I think I talked last week or the week before about the pesto, and I saw someone else who made a comment about pesto. Pesto is a great way to preserve your garlic and your basil. Throw in whatever type of nuts you like. Pine nuts is classic. I have walnuts. I use a lot of walnuts. And you make a pesto. Pesto freezes very well. But I've been loving my pesto on my salmon. I'll put the salmon in the oven, bake it, and then spread some pesto on it. Fantastic. And so it's the same basic meal, but I've changed it up because of what's growing in my garden and trying to take advantage of what I'm growing. And I think that's really the thing that we want to talk about. Steve, hello to you from Ottawa. Says my balcony garden packed it in last week. All that's left for the season is composting. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, we'll be talking more about the end of the season in the weeks ahead. I'm still enjoying fantastic harvest. It's just now ramping up with my peppers and tomatoes, but I understand for a lot of people it's beginning to wind down. So, it's always kind of a sad part of the year when we're winding down in the garden, but that just means we get more excited for next year. James says, I'm excited to plant my garlic for next spring. This is my first time planting my own generational plant. Awesome. If you haven't seen my videos, I've got a few of them. I really like my video on garlic, the complete guide. And I'm sure Jay will post that here any minute now. And it shows all the steps you need to do to plant your garlic from planting to harvest. And I do that every year. I'm looking forward to planting my garlic again. I have mostly music. I love music garlic. And so generational, great way to say it. The garlic I'm planting this year is from the bulbs that I grew last year. And next year, the garlic will be from this year. Perfect, perfect crop to just keep growing. You buy it once, or if you're lucky, it's given to you. Some of my garlic was actually given to me by a gardener friend, and then you just sustain it. You just keep growing it and give it away. I've given away some of my garlic to family and allow them to do the same thing. Keep growing it, and it just keeps going and going from year to year. So you should be very excited, James. That is one of those fantastic crops that I think everybody should grow. You can find different garlics for different regions, and as you'll see if you look at my videos, different types of garlics, the soft neck, the hard neck. Some do better in different areas. Hot areas, you might want to go with like a Cajun garlic, but something that almost all of us can grow. DLR978 says, I think even greens, kale, collard, radish, turnip, etc., can be pickled. Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I'm not sure how. I think the Asians and Cajuns do it. Oh, yeah. And so there's a few different methods. I have one of my oldest videos is on sauerkraut. And so the method when you're doing like kale or collard greens or radish or turnip leaves is it's salt. You basically just sprinkle salt. And cabbage, of course, in sauerkraut and kimchi is the classic way of doing it because there's a lot of moisture in the cabbage. So as you sprinkle salt, the moisture comes out of the leaf, and then that moisture, that very salty liquid, is what encourages the lactobacillus bacteria to grow, and that's what causes the fermentation of the cabbage. So cabbage is most often used because you can just sprinkle salt on it and the process is complete. For the thicker leaves like the kale, the collards, the radish, the turnip, there are extra steps, and often using a brine is an easier method to do it. So not a lot of information out there, but you can definitely ferment those type of greens if you want. It's easier to pickle, which is using a vinegar, and it's the same thing, a vinegar and water blend, and then you put all those greens into it, and now you've got pickled uh, leaves of all those different types of greens. So it's not common, but go for it. And pickling with the vinegar is a safer, more sure way if you haven't done it before. But definitely try to find a recipe and follow the recipe, and that's a good way to start with that pickling and fermentation process. Riverdale Gardens, julienne, the carrots, and the kohlrabi apple slaw is a great way to use them. Oh, I love julienning the carrots and or grating the carrots and putting them in a slaw. Especially, I like growing my own cabbage and doing the same thing. So I'll cut up the cabbage and I'll cut up the carrots and I'll cut up the onions and I'll cut up some garlic and make a slaw, all with stuff that I grow in the garden. And then throwing in the apple, yeah, definitely takes it to another layer. Llama Llama's been putting chopped carrots, tomatoes, onions, and everything else I have with some salt, vinegar, dash of olive oil, and letting it marinate in the fridge. Great snack or side dish. There you go. So, are you getting ideas? Are you taking notes? Are you writing this stuff down? The nice thing about these videos is you can watch them again in case you miss something. But uh, I'm getting some great ideas that I want to try some stuff. John says a lot of fruit gets made into jam. Just done 6 jars of blackberry and 6 jars of damson, all foraged. So good for you. Yeah, if you've watched me on a regular basis, you know I love making jellies and jams. And I grow rhubarb in my garden primarily to go with the strawberries that I grow in my garden. Strawberries and rhubarb together are a great blend. And I've made strawberry rhubarb jam. I've made strawberry rhubarb jelly by juicing them, and a great way to preserve and get those wonderful flavors in your garden. I love growing my raspberries and making raspberry jam. That's a key reason why I've got raspberries in my garden. So definitely those are the kind of things to consider. If you haven't made jams and jellies before, think about it. It's not that hard. I've got a couple videos on making the jelly, and there are a ton of other videos. There's a lot of information out there. Follow an approved recipe step by step. Get the Ball Blue book. That's another great option. And you can start making jams and jellies. The I don't have a link to it. Maybe I'll put a link to it for those of you watching on replay. But I have the Ball book on home preserving, I think it, or the complete guide to home preserving, something like that. It's the Ball book. And I use that a lot. It's got jams and jellies, it's got compotes, it's got all kinds of different methods, fermenting, pickling. It's a pretty thick book, hundreds of recipes of different ways you can preserve your crops. And I use that a lot. I've been doing this for years and years and years. And every time I pickle or do any type of preservation, I still pull out the book and go through the recipe to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Because especially when you're doing anything that's going to be canned and sealed like that, you want to make sure that it's going to be fresh and safe when you open it. So consider that one of those things that if you're going to do it right, and it takes a little bit of study and research to make sure you're doing it. Rick says potatoes, chips, baked, boiled, sliced on barbecue or pan with butter, baked potato cubes with garlic, yummy, must do at home. Potato scallops is my next project. Oh yeah, potatoes are one of those that are just endless as well. Roasted. I love roasted potatoes, and I'll roast potatoes with other root vegetables. So I'll take some turnips and some carrots and some beets and some potatoes and roast them all together. Fantastic. That's one of my favorite ways when I'm mixing different root vegetables. Potatoes have a starring role, of course. I eat potatoes pretty regularly. I typically fry them up into cubes or as French fries, depending on what I'm eating. Mashed potatoes is another great way to do it. We do a lot of mashed potatoes with some garlic and butter. So potatoes, fantastic ways that you can throw potatoes into a lot of things. Yeah, and Mobius says to make sauerkraut, use a tablespoon or two of brine to ferment other vegetables like carrots or brassicas. That is your ferment starter. Good idea. So the brine that you make a sauerkraut in, just like the pickling solution that might be left over in the jar, use it for other vegetables. And not only will it add that extra layer of flavor, because that flavor will come from the sauerkraut or whatever it was you were pickling, but it does act to uh, preserve that other crop. And as long as those bacteria are still active in that brine, they're going to get kick-started as soon as you add in a new vegetable. The thing about like making sauerkraut, eventually the sugars and the starches have all been eaten by the bacteria, and the population will drop, and eventually, especially if you put it in the refrigerator, be close to zero. But when you throw in fresh food for those bacteria that are still remaining, they're going to pop up and they're going to start growing again. You might need to add a little bit extra salt, but it's a great way to use the brine as a starter. Still go with a brine with salt in the proper proportions, but that starter can really kickstart things and might gain you a couple days. Wickisher Project says, Scott, we have rice every night. Good for you. Normally we eat chicken 5 days out of the week, and sometimes fish, pork, and if on sale, meat or beef. Off-grid diet ATM is limited. We do add garden veggies as we get them. Good for you. And so when we talk about rice and vegetables, do you mix in the veggies with your rice? I'll mix in my garlic and my onions with the rice on a pretty regular basis, and do that either with butter or with olive oil. But rice we were talking earlier about zucchinis and squashes. Rice mixed in with the squashes are also a great way that you can combine the two. So having the blend in your diet when you're eating the same things on a regular basis really can incorporate those kind of garden fresh vegetables. Jen says we started mixing up our Taco Tuesday filling using a roasted sweet potato and black bean filler cooked up with a little garlic and honey. Yum. Interesting idea. Yeah, I'll mix up my Taco Tuesday with fish or with shrimp. But that's interesting. I like the idea of having a vegetarian filler like the beans and the sweet potato. So you got me thinking about that. Thanks, Jay. Yeah, yesterday I was on the Urban Gardener channel, the Let's Get Growing live cast. It was a good one. Talked a little bit more than an hour about lots of stuff going on in the garden. Lots of questions answered. And if you want to check that out, go ahead and click on that link. Thanks, Jay. And Heidi had shrimp tacos just last night. Fantastic. And I'm just trying to catch up, but Mobius is saying pesto can be frozen. Yeah, what I mentioned a little while ago. And that's my preferred method, is actually to make a lot of pesto and freeze it. And then you just scoop it out into a little bit that you want to use on um, toasted bread, or like I said, with the fish. That's what I did. I just finished it. I think I started talking about this a week or two ago. I had a pretty big container of pesto, and I've been using it for a couple weeks now on all kinds of different foods, like fish primarily. But I also mixed it in with just pasta noodles. Oh, that was fantastic. But it was frozen from last year, and it was just made it over and over again. Oh, such a wonderful, wonderful dish. Solange is asking, how do you use the sunflower plant to enrich the soil? Have to take the flowers, right? So sunflower plants do a couple different things. So when the plant first growing, it can actually hinder the growth of the other plants nearby. But the sunflower roots can actually do a great job of helping to break apart the soil. I've got sunflowers, like you can see in the background here. Uh, I've got sunflowers, all different sizes and sizes all throughout my yard. And what I use them for when it comes to enriching the soil is I will chop them up as a mulch, and they'll break down over time and they'll help enrich the soil. But the big part is just letting them grow. That's why I have so many and my soil is so bad. They will grow, they'll break apart the soil because I have a real dense soil. And then when you add the leaves and the grass and the compost and everything else, that looser soil can now, and the organisms in the soil can now incorporate that organic material on top. And so the flowers themselves, since we're talking about how to use your crops, did you know you can eat the sunflower flower? That's another one of those flowers that is edible. So you can not only eat the seeds, but you can actually eat the the the, the base of the flower itself. Look into that as an option. But for the soil, like most organic materials, trying to get them into smaller pieces and then amending the soil with them is definitely an option when you're trying to get that organic matter into your soil. Rick says walnut season in Australia. I'm gathering. Saw them in the fruit shop. I don't have a walnut tree. My aunt had just a, a huge, huge walnut tree. And I used to love it. And most Christmases, she would send out walnuts as a Christmas gift. And so for many, many years, getting those walnuts from my aunt was always just a favorite part of the holiday season. So I think that's one reason why I use the walnuts in pesto, is because it does bring back some of those childhood memories of the walnuts that I would get from my aunt, and that's one of those things I still incorporate. Serena says, "Can you freeze basil pesto after making it?" Yeah, that's what we're talking about: is making pesto and then freezing it, or is it better to just pack ice cube trays with leaves and pour oil over them and freeze? So two different things. If you want to save the basil leaves, then yes, put those into ice trays, pack them in, top with olive oil, and freeze them. That's how you would save the basil leaves. But making the pesto, where you mix up the basil, the garlic, the nut, the Parmigiano cheese, Parmigiano oregano, or Parmigiano oregano cheese. I think that's how you say it. And then freezing it, yeah, that's definitely viable, and that's what I do. And so when I say I'm using pesto, it's from pesto that I made and then froze right away, and then am able to do it easily and for all kinds of different dishes. So Barbara says, what kind of garlic shall I plant for West Virginia? So check out some of my garlic videos, because I do talk about this in depth about choosing which type. And it depends on which part of West Virginia you're in. So if you're in the mountains and you have the cold winters, you would probably do better with hardneck varieties. If your winters are not as harsh and you you and you want something different, you would do the soft neck varieties. So soft neck garlic varieties tend to do better when the winters are milder, and the hard neck varieties tend to do better when the winters are harsher. And so from there, then start looking at what kind of flavors you like in garlic. So one of my garlic videos, I actually taste different garlics along with members of my family, and you can learn about the different flavors from a Russian purple striped garlic, which has a really intense flavor. I like the music because it's more balanced, it's not as harsh. Incholium red is another good one that I like growing. Spanish Roja is a very common garlic that a lot of people are growing. So one way to determine what garlic to grow in your area is to go to a local plant nursery, because most nurseries are going to be selling garlic starting probably about right now. Maybe they've already been selling the garlic for a few weeks. And typically, the garlic that's being sold in your local nursery will be the kind of garlic that will do well in your area. So there's a lot of different varieties to choose from. And so look at how harsh your winters are. I would say basically, if you're in zone 7 and above, soft necks will do better for you. If you're in zone 6 or below, hard neck varieties will do better for you. It's not saying you can't do both. I grow both hard neck and soft neck, but the hard neck just tend to do a little bit better. The hard neck, however, don't store as well. So they'll only last a few months before they need to be used, whereas the soft neck can store much longer. And so that's one reason why the garlic bulbs that you buy in your supermarket are almost always soft neck garlic, because they can store for a much longer period, and you can buy them and then save them, or grow them, harvest them, and then save them and have them for a lot longer. But the hardneck varieties have a lot more in the way of flavor and intensity of flavor, if that's something that you're looking for. Wickershire Project is asking beets. We grow beets every year. They're thin and never bulb up well. Is this a heat issue? Should we in 7A Tennessee try in the fall? Summer beets never seem to do well. Yeah, so beets are a cool season plant. They like cool weather, and when it gets too hot, they just don't do well. So if you start them too late in the spring, you should still get some pretty good bulb growth, but then they won't get extra big once the heat comes. If you start them too early in the summer, then typically they're not going to develop into big bulbs because they're just too stressed, and then the plant starts growing. And then when it gets too cool, it's probably a little bit late. So the timing of beets can be important. I've got beets growing right now that I started last month. So I'll start my beets in August. And then as the temperatures start to cool, the plants start to grow, and then they'll start forming into the nice big bulbous roots going into October and then even into November. But the heat does affect the beets, absolutely. And so that may be why your summer beets don't do well. So start thinking about doing spring beets or fall beets, and chances are you'll have more success. The best success I've had with beets are the ones that I'm harvesting later in the year, because I started them later in the summer. And so a lot of root crops taste better when you or when they're exposed to a frost. And so when the beets have that cold weather set in and that frost hits, tends to make them sweeter. And then you harvest after they've been exposed to that frost. And so when we talk about beets, let's talk about some of those beet recipes. Have you ever made borscht from beets that you grew yourself? I'm guessing very few of you have. Borscht is not one of those foods that many of us eat unless we come from a culture that serves it regularly, because beets are part of the diet. Most of us who have eaten the borscht have eaten it from some source maybe a restaurant that didn't know how to cook it right and it just didn't taste good. But if you grow your own beets and find a good recipe and make it fresh, oh, now you know why the, the the countries of Eastern Europe eat so much of it. It's tasty. And of course, it's good for you. And it's just packed with nutrients. So, beets, grow them in your garden and figure out how you could use them. That's one option. Like I talked earlier with the roasted vegetables, I love growing beets, cutting them into cubes along with those other roots, and then roasting them. I also like pickled. And my family likes my pickled beets as well. I have a recipe and I have a video on pickling beets. And so you can follow exactly how I do it in that video I made a number of years ago. And then the pickled beets on a salad is actually our preferred method of eating the beets. So you pickle the beets and then you put them in a salad along with all that other garden fresh material that you're harvesting. Great way to use beets. You can also thinly slice them and put them in a salad raw and have a beet salad. There are a number of restaurants that will serve beet salads that serve either the thin slices or they'll do the small cubes. Typically, when they do cubes, they'll steam the beets. So you'll cut the beets and steam them, or steam the beet and then cut it and then put that into a salad with a really nice vinaigrette and a nice cheese and some nuts. Fantastic way to eat beets. So lots of options in our garden for crops to grow that maybe you hadn't thought about before. I'm trying to think. Most of my gardener friends do not grow beets. I do. This year, I'm growing a white beet that I've never grown before. Last year or 2 years ago, I grew the chioja, which is like a red and white inside, and depending how you cut it, it's striped. Uh, that was a wonderful beet. I really like the yellow, the golden beets. Fantastic flavor. And so roasted, raw, pickled, in salads, by themselves. Think about it. Could be something that you're not growing that you might like in the future, something you can do. And I think it's one of those kind of things that uh, when you discover something new like that, it can be a game changer as well when you're now doing it in the garden. Lauren says, I make a carrot top chimichurri. Interesting. Chimichurri is a green sauce. And so the carrot tops, yep, another part of the plant that we don't often think about as something we use. If you use parsley in a recipe, think about using carrot tops in that same recipe. It is similar, but it's got a different flavor and definitely will brighten up a menu item that calls for the parsley. I'll take carrot tops and sprinkle them on a salad. I do a lot of things like that in a salad. Have you ever done mint leaves in your salad or basil leaves in your salad or the carrot top leaves in your salad? You're eating that bite and you're going, oh, I like that flavor. What is it? It's those kind of additions that can really, really add that variety to your diet. Dan is asking, I often bake cherry tomatoes, sliced salt, pepper, dried herbs. Sounds good. Put them in olive oil and place in the fridge. How long is it safe to keep that way? So generally, when we talk about putting something in the refrigerator, uh, 2 weeks, it should be eaten. Now, when we are putting it in olive oil, for instance, it gains a little bit of extra time. So I would say the tomatoes by themselves should probably be eaten within a week, but when mixed with the or put into the olive oil, 2 weeks. Now that's the recommended method. Uh, I'm not going to say do it longer than that, but many of us do. Many of us have things in the fridge for longer than they should, and they're still okay. One of the biggest issues is that the flavor will change over time. And that's a big reason why we want to eat them within that first week or two, even when they're in something like olive oil, because the flavor will change. As long as your refrigerator is below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which it should be, that's 4.5 degrees Celsius. That's slowing down, virtually eliminating the bacterial growth that could cause problems with that food. So as long as it stays in the refrigerator and it's well sealed, it can actually last longer as far as avoiding some of those things that'll make you sick, but you might get mold growth. And of course, the flavor is going to change. So that's a big reason why we want to eat as early as possible as we can when we are putting things in the refrigerator. Jeffrey says, hi. Hi, back to you, Jeffrey. I'm also from the Denver metro area and want to ask when the best time is to plant potatoes around here. And what are your top 3 potatoes for this Colorado area? So I've got some potato videos that start to finish as well. Like I've got the garlic complete guide. I've got a potato complete guide that you can check out. And it was made here in Colorado. And so it might answer a lot of your questions. And so typically the potatoes are going in at the beginning of summer. And depending on, what guide you're using, you can put potatoes in the ground before your last frost date. The idea being that when the potatoes, the tubers start growing underground, by the time the plant comes up, it's after your last frost date. Here in Colorado, because of our weird springs and because the ground stays cold for so long, I tend to think the potatoes do better if we wait until after the last frost date. And for most of us, that's in mid-May. And so I'll typically do my potatoes in the beginning of June, first week of June, and then I'll be harvesting depending on the potato in the middle and later in the summer. The ones that I really like, I like Yukon Gold. Yukon Gold is easy to grow here in Colorado, and I've had great success with it. I have a purple one. It's a fingerling potato. Is it the Mystic? I can't think of it. Look at my potato videos because I show the purple potatoes in my potato videos. But it's a purple fingerling potato that I like to grow. And then I'll usually try a different type of russet. Russet potatoes actually do well in Colorado. In my part of Colorado, outside Colorado Springs, years ago, it used to be a big potato growing region. And so potatoes can really do well here in Colorado. And there's a number of different russet varieties. I think Adirondack is a russet variety that I've grown and I've had good success with. So I would say those are the top 3 potatoes, and those are what I talk about in my videos. I think in the one potato video, I show harvesting all 3 of those and show what the potatoes look like at harvest time. So I've been seeing a lot of comments about all the things to do with potatoes. And so growing your own potatoes, it's easy, and pick something that you like. The purple potatoes are a lot of fun. There are a lot of purple things we grow, like purple beans, for instance. So when we talk about green beans and how to use green beans, if you grow purple beans, when you start cooking the purple beans, they'll turn green. And so if you grow purple beans hoping that you're going to have a purple bean casserole, it's going to end up being a green bean casserole. But potatoes are different. If you grow a purple potato and then roast up that purple potato, it's going to be a purple roasted potato. So really, really like that. But when you mix it with a red beet and a white potato and maybe a yellow beet and a striped turnip, it's a beautiful looking dish. And of course, really, really tasty. Jersey CI Dave is saying, making me so hungry. Good. Think about it. The hungry you feel now, think about how it's going to be when you actually start growing and fixing some of this stuff and eating it. And definitely worth it as you do your crops for the future. So often we grow and we talk about the flavors are better when we grow it, so much better than the supermarket, and in many cases better than the farmer's market. A lot of farmer's market produce tends to be, at least in my area, mass produced by some big farms, and they're growing a lot of the same stuff that goes into the supermarket. So it's good, it's fresh, but still what you grow in your garden is better and fresher. And so then when you find good ways to use it, what's better than that? Jimmy's asking, how long before your first frost date do you plant your music garlic? And so I typically am planting 3 to 4 weeks before my last frost or my first frost date. And so my first frost date typically is the middle of October. And so I'm planting my garlic either the last week of September or the first week of October, generally. Now, I will look at the long range forecast. The biggest issue when growing garlic is you just don't want to do it too early, because you want to try to avoid the sprouting of that clove. You don't want it growing into a plant before the winter sets in. That affects the bulbing, affects the health of the plant, and it takes away energy from the clove that should stay within the clove for springtime. And so getting that timing is just right. And so much of it depends on how gradual the temperatures change going into fall. So for me, the temperatures change pretty dramatically. So the middle of October, I'll have my first frost. And then by the end of October, it's freezing with snow. So that means I can put my garlic in the first week of October. I give it about 3 weeks for those roots to start developing. And then just about the point that the garlic might think about growing into a plant, the ground is so cold and the plant goes or the cloves go dormant. That works for me. If you've got a more gradual change in your fall, so the temperatures are cool and getting cooler, but you're still a ways away from a freeze, a hard freeze, then you might want to start your garlic just a couple weeks before your first frost date. Or even, I know some regions will actually put their garlic in the ground on the first frost date, because there's a more gradual modification of the temperatures going into the fall. So generally 3 to 4 weeks is the time frame that we're looking at for putting the garlic in, and then modify that by a week or two. And so for me, it's kind of a 2 to 3 week before the first frost is when I'm putting my garlic in the ground. Bettina says we grow Peruvian purple fingerlings in Eastern Ontario. Oh, that sounds good. They're yummy and taste nutty. Yeah, the flavor of the purple potatoes is different. A potato isn't a potato, just like a tomato isn't a tomato. There will be differences in all those different things. Dusty Flat says russets, red Pontiac, Kennebec, and Yukon do well in Wisconsin. German dumplings are nice but small. There you go. There's a lot of German dishes that use potatoes like a pasta. So great idea for a variation for using potatoes if you're growing potatoes. Heidi says I grew strawberry pie potatoes this year. I saw those years back and was tempted, and I haven't grown those. So it's good to hear that you grew them. I'm assuming they have done well. Myra says roasted red beets with the tops are delicious, along with roasted golden beets, olive oil, salt, and pepper. Yeah, and so this is another one of those things I was talking earlier about, how we tend to just focus on one plant at a time and one crop at a time. And so using the beet leaves, delicious. And I'll use beet leaves like I would spinach, and just chop off the leaves, saute them with some olive oil, salt, and pepper. Great way to have the beet leaves, maybe with a little bit of bacon thrown in, and then doing the root separately. But doing them together, yeah, why not? You know, I like them individually, but honestly, I haven't roasted them together. So there's a good idea for me as well. It's one of those kind of things that uh, just because you like one way doesn't mean you can't pair it with the other way you like it. Maybe it's twice as good. I'll have to give that a shot. Okay. This is so good. Yeah, I'm starting to get hungry as well. I'm starting to think about what I'm going to do for my lunch. We haven't talked a lot about tomatoes yet. Tomatoes being one of the most popular crops we're growing. And so, what do you do with your tomatoes? I've seen a few things that have popped up in the comments. I like my tomatoes so much raw. That's the way I eat most of my tomatoes is if they make it out of the garden. A lot of the cherry tomatoes, while I'm working in the garden, I'm just munching on cherry tomatoes the whole time. And then bringing the cherry tomatoes pretty much every night this week. I've gone out and harvested some cherry tomatoes, brought them in, and enjoyed them with my dinner. That's just this is one of my favorite times of year. The pink bumblebee is one of the new tomato varieties I'm trying this year. It's good. I like it, and it is the first cherry tomato that's actually ripened and is available for me to harvest. The hillbilly tomatoes are a little bit bigger and kind of a medium-sized tomato for me, at least. Orange and really tasty. I'm thinking about adding hillbilly to my list for tomatoes in the future. But raw is really my favorite way to eat the tomatoes. But I think I made a video about this actually. Freeze drying the tomatoes, the cherry tomatoes. Oh, fantastic. Now they become like a crunchy little dessert snack. And I just love the dehydrated and in this case, freeze dried. Dehydrated tomatoes are good, and I've made them in the past, but I really like the freeze dried tomatoes so much better. So that's now one of my favorite methods of preserving the tomatoes. I pickled some cherry tomatoes last year, and they were okay. I wasn't thrilled by them. The vinegar flavor was just a little bit too intense and overpowered the tomato, but there's an option. You can pickle your tomatoes by themselves or throw some tomatoes in with some of those other veggies that you might be pickling. And then, of course, sauces. I grew a lot of paste tomatoes last year to make sauce. Making your own sauce is a great way to use up your tomatoes. Now, one thing that we haven't talked about yet, and I haven't seen any comments, someone may have said it, but I haven't seen it, is to powder your vegetables. So dehydrate or freeze dry all of these that we're talking about. And then when they're completely dry, put them in a spice grinder that tends to work best and make a powder out of them. So I have pepper powder, I have tomato powder, I have garlic powder, I have onion powder. Did I say tomato powder? That was the whole point of this. I made tomato powder. And so these are all different ways that you can spice up your food by just sprinkling some of that powder, which really condenses the flavor. And so something like mashed potatoes with tomato powder on it, it's surprisingly good. Something that you might not think would go well together, but it really does taste pretty well. Tomato powder on like a corn cob. Cook your corn cob, put some butter and salt on it, and then a little bit of that tomato powder. Again, it's one of those things that just takes it to another level. It's that extra layer of flavor that really amps up the sensation in your mouth. So tomatoes have a lot of options. The sun-dried tomatoes, of course, slice them up, put them in a salad. Great way to use tomatoes. Number of different ways to preserve tomatoes that you can put into stews later on. soups, absolutely use tomatoes in your soups. So tomatoes can be a wonderful thing to use beyond just fresh. Fresh is just so fantastic. I'm not a big fan of stuffed tomatoes, but that's an option too. Like we were talking about stuffing the zucchini boat. Go ahead and scoop out the seeds of the inside of your big tomato, and then stuff it with a meat, like a ground meat of some type, with breadcrumbs, with cheese. There are lots of things you could do with the tomatoes if you like that cooked tomato flavor, along with all those things that you're stuffing it with. So, uh, lots of options out there. Serena says, I have a Rushmore tomato plant and it only has one tomato on it. Now that temps are staying below 90, will it be more productive? It should. I think I talked about this last week, and I know I've talked about it before, but that temperature of 90 degrees, about 32 Celsius, is important. Tomatoes really like it to be a little bit cooler than that. 85 is an important temperature. That's about 29 Celsius. So below 90, the flowers will now pollinate and have a better chance of pollinating. But below 85, that's when you're going to get the best fruit development. So that's one reason why this time of year, late summer, early fall, tends to be better in our gardens for the tomatoes, because the temperatures are much closer to what the tomato actually likes. And so that's something that you should consider. And then Gina has a good point. What to do with October green tomatoes? Makes a lovely chutney. And so they're starting to ripen in my garden. I'm getting that harvest, but I'm about a month away from my first frost, and not everything is going to be ripe by then. Come up with those recipes for the green tomatoes. Absolutely. A chutney. I think Eli and Kate have a video where they do like a uh, green tomato casserole of some type. I remember seeing it and thinking, oh, that's different. But lots of things that you could do with the green tomatoes. Fried green tomatoes, another thing we started talking about, doing a breading and frying the zucchini. You can do the same thing with green tomatoes. Nice big thick slices, put a nice breading coating on them, and then fry them for deep fried green tomatoes. A lot of people like green tomatoes that way. Dan says you can freeze fresh tomatoes whole, halved, or cubed, depending on the size, and then thaw and make sauce in winter. That's what I did last year. I had planned to make a video and then just put them in the freezer to use, and then used, and then didn't make a video about it. So that's exactly what I did with all those paste tomatoes. Pounds and pounds of paste tomatoes in bags in my freezer to use later. And the thing about some of the things that we freeze, and tomatoes fall into this category. Zucchini falls into this category. Those things that tend to have more water in them, when they thaw, they get pretty mushy. And so that's when you add them to a stew or a soup or something like a sauce. And tomatoes are wonderful for doing that. Milltown Life says, ooh, fried green tomatoes are the best. Breaded and fried, dipped in mayo hot sauce. Yeah, make your own sauces. So as we eat some of these things, yes, they can be used as sauces on their own, but I agree with you. I like taking mayonnaise and making my own sauce, maybe just as simple as mayonnaise and Dijon mustard. Makes a nice little tangy sauce that you can dip things into. You can experiment with lots of stuff, putting some pepper powder, especially a chili pepper powder, into that mayonnaise, zings it up a little bit more. So great idea is to actually take some of these fresh things that you're growing, either breaded or raw, but especially when you fry them, and then put a sauce like a mayo sauce on it. Definitely good. And of course, Janet is getting hungry like the rest of us. Yeah, Dwayne, good suggestion. Margarita pizza is a great use for tomatoes. And so the classic margarita pizza, just quite simply just tomatoes and cheese and garlic, not much more than that. And great way to use the tomato. So thank you for that. Those are the kind of things. That's why I wanted to get your ideas on this, because these are things that we don't always think about. We might go to a pizzeria and have a margarita pizza, and then we go home and never think about making it ourselves with our own tomatoes, with our own tomato sauce, with our own garlic. Yeah, definitely start using your stuff in a different way. Yeah, there's Jay right on top of things with a green tomato casserole. So I haven't done that. This year, I'm guessing I'm going to have a lot of green tomatoes. So maybe I'll venture outside my own comfort zone, like I'm suggesting, and go into the green tomato casserole world. GJ is saying, I would like to powder tomatoes. It's easy to do. It's easier with a freeze dryer. The thing about a freeze dryer is it just flat out dries it. The dehydrator, you have to leave it in a lot longer, but ultimately it ends up being about as long as you would put it into a freeze dryer. The thing about a freeze or a dehydrator is it it tends to make the things that we dehydrate leathery. And so the sun-dried tomatoes, the tomatoes you put out in the sun, they're kind of leathery. They're not actually dried. You can't get a jar of sun-dried tomatoes and make a powder out of that without doing more dehydrating. It's the same in the dehydrator. You can put the tomatoes in for a brief period and essentially get sun-dried tomatoes that are leathery. Put those in a jar with some olive oil and garlic and some herbs. Great way to use tomatoes. Or leave it in the dehydrator longer to the point that it snaps when you bend it. And that's the point that you can make powder. So if you have a dehydrator, you can definitely powder tomatoes. You just need to keep them in until they snap and are completely dry. And it's an easy option. It's an easy option. And Mobius says, okay, tomato powder then. Excellent. Sounds like a good salt substitute. You know, Ed, it's interesting you say that because I've cut way back on the amount of salt that I use in my diet as well, because I'm flavoring with a lot of these other things. And so, yeah, I don't even miss salt when I'm putting a powder on something because the powder flavor just really adds that extra intensity of flavor. So something to think about. Science Save says, I love salt fermenting my cherry tomatoes and cucumbers. That's a good idea. And you know, I last year when I made the pickled tomatoes, and I've been fermenting almost everything for years. And those were among the first vinegar pickles that I'd made in a while. And after I ate them, and like I said earlier, I wasn't thrilled. At the time, I thought I should have fermented these tomatoes, and I probably would have been much happier. I haven't had the fermented cherry tomatoes, but I will be doing that this year. So thank you for that suggestion. And I may make a video about it. We'll see how they turn out. I will probably film the process, and then if they turn out well, I'll release the video. If they don't turn out as well, I'll let you know in a live stream in the future. But I like the idea of a salt fermented cherry tomato, and I do already do that with cucumbers. So I think I may try that, doing some cherry tomato fermented, and then doing some cherry tomatoes mixed with cucumbers fermented, and yeah, I think that's my favorite suggestion of the day so far, something that I'm absolutely going to do. And then thank you, Dwayne. This is one of my all-time preferred ways of eating my fresh tomatoes from the garden. A tomato slice with basil leaves and mozzarella on top with a little bit of vinegar and olive oil. Oh, fantastic. And so I've been using some of my basil leaves with my tomatoes. I haven't gone to the store to get the mozzarella yet. All I'm getting right now is the cherry tomatoes. So I'll get the cherry tomatoes, slice them in half, and then sprinkle some julienne basil leaves on top of it, and then a little bit of a vinaigrette. Fantastic. But when we get to that point of the slices with the mozzarella cheese, yeah, the caprese salad, it's the way to go. And it is absolutely the reason why I would grow nothing but cherry tomatoes, because here in my part of Colorado, they do the best. They are the most prolific, and most of the time they're the tastiest. But I still grow the bigger tomatoes so that I could do the caprese salad. And it doesn't get much better than that. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, lactofermentation is the term. And so I mentioned a little bit earlier, and I talk at depth about lactofermentation in my fermentation videos, but it's all about the lactobacillus bacteria. And so the lactobacillus bacteria is what's doing the fermentation. They make lactic acid, and it's that lactic acid that drops the pH into a range that makes the food safe to eat. And so that's why it's lactofermentation, because of the lactic acid created by the lactobacillus. And so if you want to learn more about it, yeah, by all means, watch my videos, but look up the term lacto fermentation or lactic acid preservation. And there's a ton of information out there from universities and the USDA and lots of good sources to make sure that you're doing it in a safe manner. That's what it's all about. And a couple of my videos, I talk about measuring the pH just to be sure. So I've got pH meters, and I show how to do that. When you follow a recipe, you don't have to do pH testing, because the recipe that's from an approved source, a recognized, reliable source, it's going to be safe. If you are trying a recipe from a friend's grandmother, that's when you would want to do a pH test just to make sure that it would be safe before you eat it. But lactofermentation, wonderful, wonderful flavor, and it makes it last for a long time. The thing about it is the flavor's so good that whenever I ferment anything, it's gone. And I've mentioned before, my brother-in-law is really into fermentation, and it's the same with him. He's constantly making pickles of one type or another, fermenting, and just as constantly eating them. So as soon as he makes a jar, it's gone. And he makes another jar and it's gone. And that's the thing about a lot of these fermented vegetables. And everything we've talked about today can be fermented. Just go ahead and make it, eat it, make it, eat it. And if you have a bigger harvest, make a couple jars, maybe put one in the refrigerator for when the first jar is eaten. And it's just a fantastic way to go. Serena's asking, how do you tell if a zucchini flower is about to open or is just closing? Typically they open in the morning, and they're going to be nice and stiff and firm. And then they're going to be closed the next day. They're usually not open for more than a day or two. And so the next day, if you look at a closed one, if it's later in the day and it looks a little shriveled, it's closing. Or just note the flower. And this is a way to harvest the flowers. Go out to your zucchini patch and look, and you can see a whole bunch of closed flowers. Come back the next day. If they're open, harvest them. If you come back the next day and they're shriveled, well, you missed the boat. So it's pretty much a daily activity if you want to be doing the flowers to add to your recipes. Concrete Jungle's asking, can you dehydrate in the oven on low? Yes, you can. Now it depends on what you're dehydrating, because some things need a lower temperature and some things need a higher temperature. And most ovens do not go low enough for some of those things that really need a lower temperature. And so the common method for dehydrating in the oven is to turn your oven on and then to put whatever it is you're dehydrating into the oven overnight with the oven off. So you turn the oven on to build up to heat. Then you turn the oven off, put your stuff in, and let it sit overnight. That will work for those things that need a cooler temperature because the temperature in your oven will drop in time. It takes practice, and it's one of those things that it's it's not always successful. That's where the practice comes in. Dehydrators are so much easier to use, and they're much more affordable than they used to be in years past. The one I use now has 6 shelves, or is it 8 shelves? I did a video about it. I linked it below. It's got a lot of shelves and is programmable. I harvested my peaches a few weeks ago, and I juiced my peaches to make jelly. And then I took the peach pulp to make fruit leather and put that into my new dehydrator and just pushed the buttons and walked away. And it's much quieter than the old dehydrator I had. So there's lots of options with dehydrators these days. An oven can be done. Just be careful about it because it can be too hot and you end up cooking whatever it is you're trying to dehydrate, or it could be too cool and what you're trying to dehydrate just doesn't dry, and then you got to do it all over again. But definitely an option. Definitely an option. So yeah, Gina says Dehydro dryer is only $40 on Amazon and works great. The one that I linked to is more expensive than that, but it's more for if you're doing a lot of dehydrating and you want to be able to program it and walk away, which I only did for the first time last year. And so keep that in mind about how you want to dehydrate and start slow. Buy an inexpensive dehydrator just to do it. And then over time, the more you dehydrate, you might be ready to graduate to the one I've got. And I did that. I've had 3 dehydrators. I started with one of the very inexpensive ones and then moved up to one that was a little more expensive, a horizontal dehydrator as opposed to the round dehydrator, and have now moved up to my 3rd that even has more bells and whistles. So you don't have to start big, but it is a nice option. This is so fantastic. Thanks, Jay, for posting that as I started enjoying my new dehydrator because I really do like it. It works great. So fantastic. I'm going to go back and look at the chat to try to pick up on things I might have missed. I encourage you to do the same. See what ideas that you may have missed that others have offered about different ways to use what's growing in your garden. But most importantly, use what's in your garden. And if you're not sure about it, maybe you've made some notes and you have some better ideas, but do some online searches about recipes for whatever that ingredient is, and no doubt you will be inundated with new ideas. And it's the way we use our garden that often influences what we grow. So what you're doing this year with your harvest, I'm betting, will affect your planning for next year when you choose the plants that you're going to grow. I think it's a big part of planning is looking to the harvest and figuring out how you're going to use it. I'm going to be back next Monday. I appreciate all of your help, all of your enthusiasm, all of your suggestions today. And I just appreciate you all so, so much. I'll see you next week, and you can tell me all about your weeks and have your questions ready to go. See you then.